Hello there, welcome to the Science Owl Station channel. Today, we begin a quiet, meandering journey not just across the wine-dark seas of ancient Greece, but into the very chambers of human wonder itself. We are going to drift back to a time before time had a name, when the world was not a collection of facts, but a tapestry of whispers. We are going to listen to the oldest stories ever told, stories born from the deep human need to understand the thunder overhead, the sprouting of a seed, the flutter of love in the chest, and the silent, star-filled void above. So, wherever you are, let the world slow down for a while. Soften your gaze, let the hum of life around you fade, and gently drift with us into tonight's quiet exploration. Let us begin at the only place we truly can, at the beginning, but not a beginning with a bright flash or a commanding voice. Our story starts in a profound and utter stillness, a state of being so primal and formless that the ancient poets could only name it chaos. It was not disorder as we think of it, not mere confusion. It was the yawning, breathless potential of everything and nothing, all at once. A deep, cosmic sigh before the first word was ever spoken. There were no stars to pin the darkness, no earth to stand upon, no sea to reflect a sky, just this boundless, gentle void. And in that quiet, something shifted. Perhaps it was the first thought, the first stirring of existence itself. From that vast, unformed potential, the first gentle entities emerged, not with a bang, but with the softness of a breath taking shape in cold air. The first to step forth from that formless embrace was Gaia, the Earth. But imagine her not as a planet, not as a sphere of rock, but as the living, breathing idea of solidity, of a foundation. She was the warm, dark soil, the comforting solid ground that would one day cradle all life. She was the deep, silent presence beneath everything. And almost simultaneously, from that same quiet source came Tartarus, just as deep and vast, but representing the profound depths below the earth. The roots of the mountains, the endless chasms that would become the foundation of the underworld, a place of equal stillness, but of a cooler, more remote nature. Alongside them emerged Eros, who was not yet the playful, cherubic Cupid of later tales. This primordial Eros was the sweet, irresistible force of attraction, the gentle pull that would bring elements together, the longing that would form unions and create all that was to come. And then, Nyx, the night, draped herself across the nothingness, a cloak of soft, velvety darkness sprinkled with the potential of stars, and her brother Erebus, the deep shadow and mystery that dwelled within her. These were not gods with human faces, not yet. They were the essential pieces of the universe, settling into place with the quiet gravity of dewdrops forming on a spider's web in the pre-dawn hush. And from these first beings, the world began to knit itself together through gentle, inevitable unions. Gaia, the fertile earth, desired to create a match for her vastness. So from herself alone, she brought forth Uranus, the starry sky. He arched over her, a perfect, shimmering dome, resting upon her edges, and together they enclosed the growing universe in a tender, eternal embrace. Their union was the first great marriage, a celestial coupling that filled the void between Tartarus below and the height of the sky. From their love poured forth a new generation of immense power and stature. The Titans, 12 of them, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each embodying a fundamental aspect of the natural and cosmic world. There was Oceanus, the great freshwater river that circled the world's disk. Ceus and Phoebe, of inquisitive mind and radiant prophecy. Themis, of divine law and order. Mnemosyne, who was memory itself, the mother of all stories. And among them, the youngest yet most formidable, Cronus, whose name is linked to time, the inevitable, patient, and ultimately devouring force. This was the first family of the cosmos, living in a golden age where the sky forever touched the earth. But even in this idyllic state, the seeds of change were sown. Uranus, gazing down upon his children, felt not pride, but a deep unease. He feared their power, their potential, and so he pushed them back. He imprisoned them within the very body of their mother, Gaia, in her dark, subterranean depths. The warm earth groaned under this burden, the weight of her suppressed children a constant, agonizing pressure. She longed for the spaciousness of the sky, for relief from this crushing embrace. And in her silent suffering, she forged a tool of liberation, a great gray sickle of adamant, the hardest substance imaginable. And she whispered a plan into the only ear that could listen, that of her clever, determined son, Cronus. The stage was now set, not for a battle of clashing armies, but for a quiet, decisive act that would cleave one age from the next, an act waiting in the deep, patient dark for its moment to unfold. The tension between the sky and the earth was a silent, atmospheric pressure, a feeling in the very fabric of things. It was the discomfort of a universe yearning to breathe, to stretch. Gaia's whisper to Cronus was not one of anger, but of necessity, a mother's plea for space, for release. And so, when Uranus next descended in his starry cloak to embrace Gaia, Cronus was waiting in the shadows of that intimate chasm where world meets sky. What happened next was swift and profound. With the adamant sickle, a tool born of earthly suffering, Cronus reached out and severed the connection. He severed the eternal embrace itself. This was more than a physical act. It was a symbolic separation of heaven and earth, creating the very space in which life and drama could unfold. From the drops of blood that fell upon the fertile Gaia, new forms arose, the fierce Erinyes, the Furies, who would pursue crimes against kinship, the gentle Gigantes, giants, and the Melii, the nymphs of the ash trees. And from the part of Uranus that fell into the sea, mixing with the foaming waves, something beautiful began to stir, a presence we will return to later. With Uranus receding, wounded into the highest heavens, Cronus claimed dominion. He became the lord of the universe, and his sister Rhea his queen. This was the dawn of the golden age of the Titans, the Cronian age, often remembered as a time of peace and abundance, when the earth provided freely and humanity, not yet created, was but a quiet dream in the soil. But the shadow of the act that brought him to power never left Cronus. A prophecy, perhaps from Gaia herself or from the ancient wisdom of the heavens, echoed in his mind. Just as he had overthrown his father, he too was destined to be overthrown by one of his own children. This prophecy wrapped itself around his heart, a cold vine of fear that twisted through the gold of his reign. And so, a terrible pattern was born from this anxiety. As Rhea, his gentle and powerful consort, gave birth to child after child, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, Cronus would take each newborn infant and, with a grim resolve, swallow them whole. He consumed them not out of hunger, but out of a desperate, logical need to contain the threat, to keep the future locked safely within the prison of his own body. One can imagine the heavy silence that followed each birth, the joy turning to dread, Rhea's despair deepening with each loss, as her children lived on, immortal but unconscious, within the dark confines of their father's being. The weight of this cyclical tragedy grew until Rhea, her maternal grief now forged into a fierce and cunning resolve, sought counsel. She went to her parents, Gaia and Uranus, the very forces wounded by this family line. They understood the patterns of overthrow, and they offered her not just solace, but a plan. When the time came for her sixth child to be born, Rhea retreated not to the marital chamber, but to the sacred island of Crete. She found a secluded, green-draped cave on the slopes of Mount Dicte, a place humming with earthy magic, where the sounds of the world were the gentle trickle of a hidden spring and the rustle of leaves. There, attended by friendly spirits, she gave birth to a son. This was Zeus. To outwit the all-consuming father, a substitution was necessary. Rhea took a stone of substantial size. Some say she wrapped it in swaddling clothes, and with a heart both heavy and hopeful, presented it to Cronus. In his fearful haste, he swallowed the stone, believing it to be his latest son. The ruse worked. The real infant Zeus was left in that Cretan cave, hidden from the titanic gaze. But a baby, even a divine one, cannot be left alone. And so, the elements themselves conspired to nurture him. He was cared for by the nymph Adrastea and her sister Io, daughters of the king Melicius. They fed him not on milk alone, but on the rich, magical substance of the land, the milk of the goat nymph Amalthea, whose horn would later become the cornucopia, the endless horn of plenty. The very bees of the mountain brought him their sweetest honey, and to mask his cries from the ever-listening Cronus, the Curides, armed and divine attendants of Rhea, performed a vigorous, rhythmic dance, clashing their spears against their shields. The loud, martial music they created was not a sound of war, but a lullaby of protection, a percussive curtain that shielded the most important secret in the cosmos, the future growing strong. In this hidden, nurturing cradle, Zeus did not simply grow. He absorbed the essence of the world he was destined to rule. He felt the solid patience of the mountain, the nourishing flow of the goat's milk, the sweetness of the bee's labor, and the protective rhythm of the dance. His childhood was one of rooted secrecy, a far cry from the golden halls of his Titan father. And as he grew from a babe to a powerful youth, the energy of the world began to subtly shift. The swallowed stone sat heavy in Cronus's stomach, a constant, indigestible reminder that a piece of the plan was out of place. And deep within him, his other children waited, dormant but undimmed. The quiet cave in Crete was the calm eye of the gathering storm, a storm that would not rage with mindless violence, but would be orchestrated by a god raised on cunning and nurtured by the very earth that longed for a new balance. Time in the realm of myth is a fluid thing. It stretches and condenses like breath on a cold morning. The youth nurtured in the Cretan cave grew to formidable maturity, his mind sharpened by solitude and his spirit tempered by the earthy wisdom of his protectors. He understood his destiny not as a mere rebellion, but as a necessary correction, a rebalancing of the cosmic scales that had been tipped by fear and consumption. His first act was one not of force, but of clever liberation. He sought out Métis, the Titanis of wise counsel and deep thought, the very embodiment of cunning strategy. From her, he obtained a potent, gentle emetic, a subtle herb mixed with honeyed water. Disguised as a humble cupbearer, Zeus approached the court of his father, Cronus, who ruled from the lofty heights of Mount Othrys. The encounter was quiet, devoid of bluster. Cronus, his reign long and his digestion perpetually troubled by the stone of substitution, accepted the offered draft. The effect was swift and profound. It was not a violent upheaval, but a great, reluctant reversal. First, the smooth, swallowed stone was released, clattering onto the divine floor. Then, one by one, in the reverse order of their consumption, came the immortal children: Poseidon, god of the restless seas; Hades of the silent depths; Hera of sacred partnership; Demeter of the fruitful earth; and Hestia of the hearth's steady flame. They emerged not as infants, but as fully grown, radiant divinities, slightly dazed but brimming with power that had been incubating within their father's form for ages. The family was reunited, but the fracture was absolute. Gratitude to their liberator fused with a deep, shared grievance against the father who had imprisoned them. The sides were drawn. What followed was not a swift battle, but a long, slow-motion cataclysm known as the Titanomachy, a war that reshaped the world itself. For 10 years, the two generations clashed, a conflict of such scale that it was less like a war and more like a continent deciding to rearrange itself. The Titans, led by the formidable Cronus, Atlas, and Menoetius, held the advantage of experience and held fast to their stronghold on Mount Othrys. The younger gods, the Olympians, rallied around Zeus from Mount Olympus. But the stalemate was profound, a grinding tension that vibrated through the bones of the earth. The combatants wielded mountains as projectiles, hurling entire peaks like thunderous stones. The seas boiled where they met the scorched earth, and the very sky groaned with the strain. It was a symphony of elemental fury, played on a geological scale. Understanding that raw power alone would not break the deadlock, Zeus, with his innate strategic mind, remembered another set of his grandmother's children, still imprisoned in the deepest dungeons of Tartarus: the Cyclopes and the Centimanes. Uranus, in his fear, had locked them away long before. These were beings of a different order. The Cyclopes, Brontes, Thunder, Steripes, Lightning, and Argesh Bright, were not the simple, pastoral creatures of later tales. They were master smiths of the primordial world, their single eye seeing to the heart of cosmic forces. The Centimanes, the hundred-handed ones, Cottus, Briareos, and Gyges, were beings of unimaginable physical potency, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. Their release was an act of profound consequence. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged for Zeus his definitive weapons: the thunderbolt, a concentrated, jagged beam of pure atmospheric fury. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident, a scepter to shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, they fashioned the helm of darkness, which granted the wearer the gift of invisibility, a shroud of utter obscurity. With these new powers, and with the Centimanes now hurling not one, but hundreds of boulders with unimaginable force and precision, the tide of the slow war began to turn. The final confrontation was a spectacle of terrifying beauty. The Centimanes, standing as tall as the mountains they threw, created a relentless barrage of stone, a storm of granite and basalt. Zeus, from the high air, unleashed volleys of lightning that lit the world in stark, white flashes, searing the very air. The earth shook under Poseidon's trident. The conflict reached its crescendo not with a single blow, but with a gradual, overwhelming press of force. The Titans were finally subdued, their strength exhausted against this new, coordinated might. Victory demanded a new order. Most of the defeated Titans were consigned to the lightless depths of Tartarus, where the Centimanes, now their eternal guards, stood vigilant. But the cosmos required stewardship. The three brother gods drew lots for their dominions. The dark, unseen lot of the underworld fell to Hades, who withdrew to his silent kingdom with a solemn dignity. The vast, shifting plains of the seas and oceans became the domain of Poseidon, his heart as tempestuous and deep as his new realm. And the radiant, boundless sky, the air, and the right to preside over the divine assembly on Mount Olympus fell to Zeus. The sky was finally separated from the earth not by a sickle's cut, but by a divine jurisdiction, creating a lasting space for cloud, for bird flight, for weather, and for the play of light. The age of the Titans had closed with a slow geological rumble. A new pantheon now stood poised on the sunlit slopes of Olympus, ready to weave a more complex, intimate tapestry of stories involving gods, nature, and the creatures who would soon walk the earth below, humanity. With the old order settled into the quiet depths of memory, a new luminescence began to grace the world. High above the lands of Greece, beyond the reach of mortal storms, where the air is crystalline and the light has a quality of eternal, soft-edged dawn, rose the halls of Mount Olympus. It was less a mountain as we know it and more the very idea of a mountain. A divine acropolis suspended between earth and the starry firmament, its peaks wreathed in clouds that were not barriers, but the softest of veils. This was not a fortress of war, but a home of shimmering courtyards, breezy porticos, and quiet gardens where ambrosia grew and nectar flowed in streams of liquid light. It was a realm of perfected, serene order, and here the victorious gods began to weave the delicate web of their influence over the world below. First among them, the anchor and the arbiter was Zeus. His presence was not constantly thunderous. Rather, it was the foundational hum of authority in the air. He was the gatherer of clouds, the one whose slight frown could send a weather front slowly marching across a continent. His weapon, the thunderbolt, rested at his side not as a mere tool of destruction, but as the ultimate symbol of ratified power, of celestial law. His throne, carved from polished ether, sat at the head of the divine council. But Zeus was also the god of hospitality and oaths, the protector of the supplicant. His will was the weather vane of fate, turning with deliberate, often inscrutable slowness, directing the broad patterns of destiny while his siblings and children attended to the details of the world. Beside him sat his sister and queen Hera. To envision her is to feel the profound, complex essence of partnership itself. She was the aura of the sacred marriage bond, the stability of the royal household, the fierce protector of its sanctity. Her gaze was regal and knowing, often holding a soft, sorrowful understanding of the imperfections she presided over. The peacock, with its 100 watchful eyes, was sacred to her, a symbol of her all-seeing awareness. While Zeus managed the cosmic framework, Hera embodied the intricate, sometimes painful web of relationships that held society, both divine and mortal, together. Her anger, when it came, was not a flash of lightning, but a cold, sustained season of misfortune, a testament to the deep wounds inflicted upon the vows she cherished. Then there was Poseidon, who, though his realm was the sea, maintained his place in the Olympian assembly. When he ascended from his submarine palaces, the scent of brine and deep kelp seemed to linger in the air. He was the earth-shaker, his great trident a scepter that could stir not just tidal waves, but the very tectonic bones of the world, causing the land to tremble and crack in slow, groaning shudders. His mood was reflected in the sea's infinite faces, serene and azure one moment, a churning, foamy gray tumult the next. He was also the lord of horses, those magnificent creatures born, myth says, from his striking the shore with his trident, combining the power of the wave with the speed of the land. His sister Demeter brought a different, grounding energy to the divine heights. She was the felt presence in the sun-warmed field of grain, the patient force within the buried seed. Her essence was the rich, dark loam, the life-giving cycle of sowing, growth, harvest, and rest. While others ruled ephemeral domains, Demeter's power was in the tangible, nourishing pulse of the earth itself. Her hands were often imagined stained with soil, not as a mark of dirt, but as the badge of her sacred, sustaining labor. Her love was deep, maternal, and rooted, and the story of her heartache, we will soon learn, would become the very rhythm of the mortal year. Next came Athena, who sprang fully formed and armored from the brow of Zeus, a literal birth of thought. She was the cool, clear clarity of the strategic mind in the midst of chaos, goddess of wisdom, of reasoned warfare, in contrast to Ares's frenzy, and of the skilled craftsman's hand. Her symbol was the owl, a creature of silent, nocturnal insight. To her belonged the measured plan, the well-woven tapestry, the perfectly balanced ship, and the just law. Her presence on Olympus was like a sharp, clean line, the embodiment of civilization's order emerging from nature's raw potential. She was a patron and protector, offering the gifts of intellect and skill to those who approached problems with reverence and cunning. Finally, among this first group was Apollo, the Radiant One. He drove the chariot of the sun across the sky, but his light was more than celestial. It was the light of reason, of healing, of artistic harmony. He was the god of the lyre's structured melodies, of archery's perfect, distant aim, and of prophecy's mysterious clarity, channeled through his oracle at Delphi. His twin sister Artemis belonged to the wild, nocturnal woods. Apollo belonged to the sunlit grove, the healing sanctuary, the civic space where music and poetry were performed. He represented the beautiful, logical pattern that could be found in all things, the mathematical ratio in a chord of music, the diagnostic logic of a physician, the intricate, ambiguous truth of a divine pronouncement. His light was not harsh, but illuminating, revealing form, order, and sometimes painful truth. Together, these six formed a core around which the world's new operations turned. From their serene heights, they cast long, intertwining shadows over the mortal realm below, shadows of weather and law, of harvest and craft, of marital vows and artistic inspiration. They were not remote puppeteers, but intimately connected forces, their own dramas and relationships echoing and amplifying the joys and tribulations of the lives taking root far beneath the cloudy veils of their home. While the first 6 Olympians represented the grand, governing forces of sky, sea, earth, and social order, the remaining members of this divine family attended to the more intimate, wild, and intricate threads of existence. They filled in the canvas with shades of passion, craft, instinct, and transition, completing a pantheon that mirrored every facet of the emerging human experience. First among this second group was Artemis, Apollo's twin, but a creature of an utterly different realm. If Apollo was the sun's clarifying light, Artemis was the moon's cool, silver-lit path through a trackless forest. She was the goddess of the hunt, but her connection to the wild was not one of domination. It was one of profound, sacred belonging. She moved silently through the mountain glades, accompanied by a chorus of nymphs, her arrows as swift and sure as moonlight breaking through a cloud. She was the protector of the young, of all vulnerable creatures, and of women in childbirth, a paradox that speaks to her essence. She was the fierce, independent guardian of life in its most natural and untamed state. To seek her favor was to step off the beaten path, to listen to the rustle in the undergrowth, and to respect the delicate, brutal balance of nature that operates without reference to city walls or human laws. In stark contrast to both Athena's strategy and Artemis's sacred wildness stood Ares, the god of war's raw, chaotic frenzy. His presence on Olympus was like a low, discordant hum, a necessary, if unwelcome, vibration. He embodied the brutal glory of combat, the searing heat of rage, the clangor of shields, and the grim mud of the battlefield. The other gods often viewed him with distaste. His motives were rarely complex, his methods devoid of grace or higher purpose. Yet, he was a reflection of an undeniable part of reality, the primal, destructive impulse that resides in the heart of conflict. He was not the soldier fighting for home or justice. He was the battle rage itself, a force as natural and devastating as a wildfire, beautiful only in its terrible, pure energy. Then, there was Aphrodite, whose very origin story is one of breathtaking elemental beauty. She arose from the sea foam, Aphros, that gathered around the severed part of Uranus, which had fallen into the waves after Cronus's act. She stepped onto the shore at Cyprus, fully formed and radiating an aura that softened the air and made flowers bloom in her footprints. She was the personification of desire, attraction, and beauty, a power so fundamental it could sway gods and upend empires. But her domain was not merely romantic love. It was the magnetic pull that brings all things together, the cohesion in the cosmos, the spark of creation, the profound, often inconvenient longing that stirs in every heart. Her laughter was like the gentle clinking of wind chimes, and her gaze could unravel the most disciplined mind, reminding all of existence of its underlying, irresistible drive to connect and create. The husband of this radiant goddess was Hephaestus, the master craftsman and divine smith. His story is one of rejection turned into sublime artistry. Cast from Olympus by Hera, or in some tales by Zeus for being born lame, he fell for a day and a night before landing in the sea. He was raised in secret, and his genius flourished in solitude. His forges were said to be beneath volcanoes, where the earth's creative fire brews. He was the architect of the gods' palaces, the maker of their wondrous artifacts. Zeus's thunderbolts, Achilles' armor, Pandora herself. His power was in transformation, taking raw metal and fire and coaxing from them both exquisite beauty and formidable function. His temperament was not of the forge's roar, but of its focused, creative heat. In him, physical imperfection housed consummate skill, a reminder that true creation often comes from a place of perceived lack or isolation. The messenger who traversed the boundaries between all these realms was Hermes. Born at dawn to Zeus and the nymph Maia, he was precocious beyond measure, inventing the lyre from a tortoise shell before the day was out. He was the god of thresholds, of travel, commerce, and cunning. With his winged sandals and herald staff, he was the only one who moved freely between Olympus, the mortal world, and even the somber halls of Hades. He was the patron of travelers, heralds, and, with a mischievous grin, thieves. He represented the nimble mind, the clever solution, the profitable deal, and the safe passage. He was the connective tissue of the cosmos, the divine whisper carrying news, guidance, and sometimes trickery, ensuring that no realm remained entirely isolated from another. Finally, there was Hestia, the eldest Olympian sister, who embodied a different kind of centrality. She was the goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire at the center of every home and every city's communal hall. Her presence was not one of dramatic myth, but of constant, gentle warmth. She represented domestic tranquility, the sacrificial flame, and the unity of the family or community gathered around its source of light and heat. So essential was her stable, quiet presence that when the god of ecstasy, Dionysus, later claimed his place on Olympus, Hestia willingly stepped aside from the formal council. She did not lose her divinity. Rather, she became integrated into every hearth, her worship a daily, humble practice. Dionysus, for his part, brought the dimension of ecstatic release, wine, theater, and fertile madness, the necessary counterpart to Apollo's ordered light, proving that the pantheon could evolve, absorbing the new while honoring the quietly eternal. Together, these 12 and the spirit of the ever-present Hestia formed a complex, breathing organism. They were not a council of perfect, moral rulers, but a family of immense, often flawed personalities, each governing a fundamental piece of the world's and the heart's landscape. Their interactions, their loves, their jealousies, and their interventions would become the stories that explained why the world feels the way it does. Beautiful and cruel, logical and wild, sacred and profoundly, wonderfully human. From the shimmering heights of Olympus, where light plays upon marble and ambrosia, our gaze must now drift downward through the layers of soil and stone to a realm of a different kind of permanence. This is not a descent into terror, but into quiet, not into punishment, but into a profound and universal rest. This is the domain of Hades, the unseen one, the lord of the quiet depths. While his brothers drew the sky and the sea, his lot was the world below, a realm as essential and vast as those above. For what is life without its eventual gentle conclusion? The Greeks called this place by many names. Hades, after its ruler, the house of Hades, or simply the unseen. To enter it, souls undertook a journey guided by Hermes to the edge of the known world, to a place where deep groves of black poplars and sterile willows grew in perpetual twilight. Here flowed the first and most famous of the underworld's rivers, the Styx, the river of hatred, or more anciently, the river of dread. Its waters were a dark, solemn mirror, and to swear an oath by the Styx was the most binding vow a god could make, for its waters touched the very roots of cosmic order. Charon, the aged, taciturn ferryman, would pole his skiff across these still waters, but only for those whose bodies had received the proper rite of burial, with a coin placed under the tongue to pay the fare. It was the first transition, the crossing from the world of striving to the world of repose. Guarding the far shore, where the dim paths began their divergence, was Cerberus, often envisioned as a monstrous three-headed hound. His role was not to terrorize, but to guard the threshold. He ensured that those who had crossed into the quiet country did not wander back out, preserving the necessary boundary between the living and the dead. His presence was a guarantee of order, his low growl the sound of that boundary itself. Beyond him, the landscape opened into the field of asphodel. This was the destination for the vast majority of souls. Here, the ghostly forms or shades drifted like faint smoke among the stalks of the pale asphodel flowers, whose roots were said to be the food of the dead. It was a state of muted, dreamless neutrality. Not pain, not joy, but a gentle, endless forgetting of the vividness of life, a quiet echo of what once was. But the underworld was not monolithic. For those blessed by the gods, particularly heroes and the righteous, there lay the Elysian fields or the Isles of the Blessed. This was a realm of soft, perpetual sunset, where the air was lighter and the meadows were forever green. Here, souls enjoyed a peaceful, conscious rest, engaging in the pastimes they loved in life: wrestling, playing music, conversing. In a land free from sorrow and labor, it was the closest the Greek imagination came to a paradise, a reward for a life lived in harmony with divine favor. And in profound contrast, at the very bottom of the underworld, lay Tartarus. Originally the primordial pit, it now served as a prison for the defeated and the truly wicked. It was here that the Titans were bound, and here that later myth placed those who committed direct sins against the gods, like Sisyphus, forever rolling his stone, or Tantalus, forever reaching for unreachable fruit and water. Tartarus was not a place for ordinary souls. It was the cosmic basement where the energies of rebellion and profound disorder were contained, a deep, cold anchor that allowed the rest of the universe above to maintain its balance. Presiding over this vast, silent kingdom was Hades himself. He is often conflated with his realm, and his modern name evokes darkness. But in myth, he is a solemn, dignified, and just figure. He is Pluton, the rich one, for from his earth come all precious metals and the fertility of the soil. His helm, forged by the Cyclopes, granted invisibility, symbolizing the unseen nature of death and wealth. He ruled not with malice, but with an unwavering, impartial steadiness. His was the ultimate patience, the administration of an eternal, quiet realm. And by his side sat its queen, Persephone. Her presence is the single note of vivid life and cyclical return in this static land. She was not born here, but was brought here, and her story is the key that unlocks the heart of this realm, explaining not just the underworld's connection to the world above, but the very turning of the seasons themselves. She is the daughter of Demeter, the life-giving goddess of the harvest, and her annual journey between her mother's sunlit world and her husband's shadowed one creates a pulse that the whole earth feels. In her, the deepest chthonic realm and the brightest Olympian world are forever linked, in a cycle of absence and return, of grief and reunion, that makes the silence of Hades not an absolute end, but part of a greater breathing rhythm. To understand the deep, green heart of the world, we must return to the sunlit realm of Demeter, the goddess whose being is the fertile soil, the swelling grain, the very possibility of abundance. Her joy was her daughter, Persephone, Kore, the maiden, a spirit of such innocence and spring-like radiance that where she walked, crocuses pushed through the earth and lilies turned their faces to her light. Their bond was the bond of root and blossom, inseparable and whole. One day, as Persephone wandered in a Nysian meadow with her companions, the Oceanids, the air was drowsy with the hum of bees and the scent of blooming violets. She was drawn to a narcissus of breathtaking beauty, a flower that Gaia, at the behest of Hades, had caused to grow as a lure. Its 100 blooms cast a fragrance so potent it seemed to still the very air. As she reached to pluck it, the earth beneath her feet sighed open. What happened next was not a violent attack, but a swift and profound claiming. Hades, lord of the unseen realm, emerged in his chariot of darkened gold, drawn by immortal steeds whose hooves made no sound. In one fluid motion, he gathered the startled goddess into his arms and descended back into the chasm, which closed above them as softly as water sealing over a dropped stone. The only witness was the sun god, Helios, high in his chariot, and the plaintive echo of Persephone's cry, quickly swallowed by the earth. The meadow fell silent. The flowers, a moment ago bright and nodding, seemed to freeze in place. The world held its breath. Demeter felt the rupture in her very being. A cold void opened where once there had been the warm presence of her daughter. She tore her divine diadem from her hair, cast a dark cloak over her shoulders, and began to wander the earth, a figure of primal, grieving motherhood. For 9 days and 9 nights, she walked, neither eating nor drinking ambrosia, her form fading with her hope. She asked all she met, gods, nymphs, mortals, but none would speak, for fear of the dark lord below. Finally, on the 10th day, the all-seeing Helios, moved by her anguish, told her the truth. Zeus himself had consented, giving Persephone to his brother Hades as his queen. A cold fury then filled Demeter, a sorrow so deep it turned to a silent, potent strike. She withdrew from Olympus, disguising herself as an aged mortal woman, and came to the town of Eleusis. There, in her grief, she allowed the world to wither. She withheld her arete, her life-giving power. The seeds in the soil shrank back, refusing to sprout. The vines turned to brittle sticks. The fruit trees bore nothing but dust. A great, silent famine began to creep across the earth. Mortals' prayers rose in vain. The altars grew cold. The gods themselves grew uneasy, for without the sacrifices of grateful mortals, their own honor faded. It was the first winter, born not of a celestial cycle, but of a mother's inconsolable heart. Zeus, seeing the earth become a barren, silent tomb, understood the necessity of compromise. He could not simply command his brother to release the bride he had taken with consent, nor could he let his sister's grief destroy the order of life. He sent first Iris, then each of the Olympians in turn to plead with Demeter, but her heart was a locked seed. She declared she would not restore life to the world until she beheld her daughter's face again. Finally, Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger of gentle words, down to the underworld to parley with Hades. In the quiet halls of the dead, Hermes found Hades seated beside Persephone, who had been reigning as his honored queen. The Lord of the Dead listened to Zeus's command. He was not a thief, but a king who had received his due. Yet he was also a part of the greater order. He agreed to let Persephone return to the light, but with a quiet condition born of his own lonely desire. Before she left, he offered her a pomegranate, the fruit of the dead, its ruby seeds glistening like condensed darkness. In her joy, or perhaps in a moment of nascent bond, Persephone ate 4 or 6 or 7 of the sweet, tart seeds. It was a simple, almost innocent act, but in the laws of the cosmos, to eat the food of a realm is to bind oneself to it forever. Thus, a delicate, eternal compromise was struck. Because she had eaten the seeds of the underworld, Persephone was obliged to return to her husband for a portion of each year. In the ancient telling, it is often 1/3 the 4 dark months of winter. For that time, she reigns as the gracious queen of the shades, and Demeter, in her mourning, lets the earth grow cold and still, the trees skeletal, the fields fallow. But when Persephone ascends once more, climbing the path to the world of light, spring erupts in a riot of relief. Demeter's joy makes the flowers burst forth. The grain shoots green and eager from the soil, and life celebrates its own return. This, then, is the quiet truth behind the turning wheel of the year. It is not a mechanical orbit, but a story written in the language of love and loss, of negotiation between light and dark, presence and absence. Every autumn leaf is a sigh of Demeter's coming sorrow. Every crocus piercing the late snow is a testament to her inextinguishable joy. The myth tells us that the deepest cycles of nature are intimately tied to the heart's rhythms, that the world itself breathes in time with a mother's longing and a daughter's dual destiny, to be both the maiden of spring and the queen of the necessary dark. Having journeyed to the silent depths below, let us now float upward through layers of cool stone and dark earth until we break through into a realm of shifting, breathing blue. We emerge not into the air, but into the embrace of another world entirely, the vast, ancient, and eternally moving sea. This is the domain of Poseidon, the Earthshaker, but it is a realm so immense and primeval that it contains deities older than the Olympians, beings who embody the very essence of water in its countless forms. First, we must feel the sea as the Greeks did. It was not merely a body of water, but a living, pulsing entity, a road to unknown lands and a barrier of profound mystery. Its surface was an ever-changing canvas. One moment a sheet of hammered, placid gold under Apollo's chariot. The next, a chaos of iron-gray waves capped with angry, hissing foam. Its depths were the ultimate unknown, a place of crushing pressure and silent, alien life. And presiding over this magnificent, terrifying expanse was Poseidon. When he drove his chariot across the waves, drawn by hippocamps, creatures with the forequarters of horses and the coiling tails of fish, the sea would grow calm and smooth before him, a path of liquid glass. But when he was angered, he would strike the water with his trident, and from that point, great storm surges would radiate outward, or the seafloor would buckle, sending tremors through the solid land. His temperament was the sea's temperament, majestic, generous, and unpredictably fierce. He was also the god of freshwater springs and of horses, linking the tame vitality of the land with the wild power of the deep. But before Poseidon, there was an even more fundamental presence: Oceanus. In the earliest cosmogony, Oceanus was not a god of the sea we know, but the titan who personified the great freshwater river that was believed to encircle the entire flat disk of the earth. He was the source of all waters, all rivers, springs, and yes, the seas themselves flowed from him. He represented the boundary of the known world, a soothing, endless loop of current. He and his sister wife Tethys were the parents of 3,000 river gods, the Potamoi, and 3,000 ocean nymphs, the Oceanids. Oceanus often remained aloof from the squabbles of the younger gods, a serene, ancient force representing the ultimate cyclical flow from which everything comes and to which everything returns. Then there are the wise old sea gods, the gentle elders of the deep. Nereus, the old man of the sea, was a son of Pontus, the primordial sea, and Gaia. He was a prophetic deity, known for his truthfulness and gentle nature. He possessed the gift of prophecy and the ability to change his shape, a common talent among ancient sea deities. He dwelt in a shimmering cave in the depths of the Aegean with his wife Doris, an Oceanid, and their 50 daughters, the Nereids. These nymphs of the Mediterranean were beautiful and benevolent, often depicted riding dolphins or seahorses. They represented every lovely aspect of the sea: the sparkle of sunlight on a wave, the gentle swell of a calm tide, the safe passage for sailors. Among them, the most famous was Thetis, whose destiny was to bear a son greater than his father. To avoid this cosmic threat, Zeus himself arranged for her to marry a mortal, Peleus, and from that union was born the greatest Greek hero of the Trojan War, Achilles. Another shape-shifting sea god was Proteus, who herded the seals for Poseidon. He, too, knew all things, past, present, and future, but would only reveal his knowledge if captured and held fast as he cycled through a terrifying series of transformations, from lion to serpent to water to flame. To wrest truth from him required immense patience and strength, a metaphor for the difficulty of grasping the sea's secrets. And there was Phorcys, another primordial sea god, father of many of the sea's more monstrous inhabitants, like the Gorgons and the Graeae, reminding us that the deep holds not just beauty, but ancient, strange terrors. Finally, we have the messenger of the deep, Triton, the son of Poseidon and Amphitrite, a Nereid queen. He was often depicted as a merman, with the upper body of a man and the tail of a fish. He carried a conch shell, which he would blow like a trumpet to calm or raise the waves at his father's command. His form became the archetype for all mermen, a bridge between the human form and the fluid mystery of the aquatic world. In later tales, there were said to be many Tritons, a whole race of beings who formed the retinue of the Sea King. Together, these deities paint a picture of the sea not as a mere location, but as a complex, layered society and a state of being. It is a realm of profound age, Oceanus, of volatile power, Poseidon, of gentle wisdom, Nereus, of communal beauty, the Nereids, and of oracular mystery, Proteus. To sail upon it was to move through a living, divine landscape, where every ripple might be the passage of a nymph, every storm the mood of a god, and every calm sunset on the water a blessing from the ancient, encircling flow of Oceanus himself. It was a reminder that the world was surrounded and permeated by this fluid, life-giving, and potentially perilous element, ruled by a family whose nature was as deep and changeable as the waters they called home. From the vibrant, untamed chorus of the nymphs and satyrs, we now turn to a quieter, more profound act of creation. It is an act that occurs not in the grand courts of Olympus or the shadowy depths of the sea, but in the soft, damp clay of a riverbank, in the first moments of dawn when the world is still fresh with possibility. This is the story of how we came to be. A story not of triumphant genesis, but of gentle shaping, terrible risk, and a gift that carries the weight of both blessing and curse. It is the story of Prometheus, the titan who foresaw, and the first woman, Pandora, whose curiosity would define the human condition. Our tale begins with the titan Prometheus, whose name means forethought. Unlike his brethren who fought against the new Olympian order, Prometheus possessed a wise, crafty mind and often aided Zeus. Yet, his loyalty was not to the gods alone, but to a potential he saw in the earth itself. In the quiet aftermath of the Titanomachy, when the world was ordered but still largely empty of mortal voices, Prometheus went to a riverbank. There, under the watchful eye of his slow-thinking brother Epimetheus, afterthought. He took up the rich, dark clay, moistened it with river water, and began to knead and shape it. He did not sculpt us in the image of the beasts, but in the likeness of the gods themselves, upright, gazing toward the heavens. Into this earthen form, Athena, goddess of wisdom, breathed the divine pneuma, the spirit granting us life. Thus, humanity was born, fragile yet imbued with a spark of the celestial. But Epimetheus, tasked with distributing gifts to all creatures, had been reckless. He had given away all the best attributes: swiftness to the stag, strength to the lion, flight to the birds, thick fur to the bear, leaving the naked, defenseless humans with nothing. Seeing our vulnerability, Prometheus's compassion ignited. He resolved to steal for us the most vital gift of all, fire. Fire was the sole property of the gods, a tool of Olympus, the essence of Hephaestus's forge and Hestia's sacred hearth. It represented not just warmth and protection from predators, but technology, civilization, and the power to transform the raw into the cooked, the ore into the tool. One night, Prometheus ascended to Olympus. Some say he took a single, glowing ember from the sun chariot of Helios. Others, that he lit a torch from the divine hearth. He hid the fire in the hollow stalk of a giant fennel plant and carried it, smoldering and secret, down to the world of men. The gift was transformative. With fire, humans could now ward off the chill of night, forge metals into plows and swords, cook their food, and gather around a communal flame to tell stories. It was the dawn of culture, of community, of progress. But for Zeus, this was an act of profound insolence. The boundaries between divine and mortal had been dangerously blurred. The king of the gods saw in this act not just disobedience, but a threat to the established order. Punishment had to be severe, and it had to be twofold: one for the trickster Titan, and one for the favored creatures he had dared to uplift. For Prometheus, Zeus devised a torment of exquisite, endless agony. The Titan was dragged to the remote, windswept crags of the Caucasus Mountains. There, with unyielding chains forged by Hephaestus himself, he was bound to a jagged rock. Each day, a monstrous eagle, the emblem of Zeus, would swoop down and tear open his flesh, devouring his immortal liver. Each night, as a titan, his liver would regrow, only for the cycle of pain to begin again at dawn. His was a punishment of eternal recurrence, of felt conscious suffering for a crime of compassion and foresight. Yet, even in his torment, Prometheus held a secret. He knew a prophecy concerning the potential downfall of Zeus. This knowledge was his only leverage, a grim hope for a future negotiation, making his suffering not just a punishment, but a stalemate of cosmic significance. For humanity, Zeus's punishment was more subtle, and it came in the form of a gift. He commanded Hephaestus to mix earth and water and mold the first woman. The gods themselves then endowed her with every allure. Aphrodite gave her grace and desire. Athena taught her needlework and cunning. Hermes bestowed upon her a shameless mind and the power of persuasive speech. They clothed her in fine silvers and garlanded her with flowers. She was named Pandora, all gifted, but her most famous possession was a large jar, often mistranslated as a box, given into her care. Within it, at Zeus's command, the gods had sealed all the evils and hardships of the world. Toil, sickness, sorrow, envy, greed, and old age. Only one thing remained outside, Elpis, hope. Pandora was sent not to Prometheus, who would have been wary, but to his brother Epimetheus. Despite Prometheus's warnings to accept no gift from Zeus, Epimetheus, captivated by her beauty, welcomed her. For a time all was well, but curiosity, placed in her heart by the gods, began to gnaw at Pandora. What was in this great jar she was forbidden to open? One day, unable to bear the mystery any longer, she lifted the lid. In a silent, rushing torrent, the contents escaped. All the miseries that now haunt human life spread across the world, invisible and pervasive. In terror, Pandora slammed the lid back down, trapping the one thing that had not yet fled: hope. This is the poignant, ambiguous core of the myth. We are left with a world filled with suffering, the consequence of divine wrath and mortal curiosity. But we are also left with hope, still contained, still in our possession. Does this mean hope is the final, unreleased evil? Or is it the one comfort the gods allowed us to keep, the solace that makes our burdens bearable? The myth does not say. It presents the jar and leaves us to ponder its final occupant. Our existence, as shaped by these events, is thus defined by a fundamental duality. We are beings of craft and aspiration, warmed by a stolen divine fire, yet we walk through a world seeded with sorrow, sustained only by the fragile, enigmatic presence of hope, locked away yet forever ours to wonder about. We are the children of clay, fire, and a sealed jar. The clay is shaped, the fire is stolen, the jar is sealed. Humanity, now fully awake in a world both gifted and cursed, begins its long, stumbling walk across the stage of the earth. And walking beside them, sometimes ahead, sometimes tragically behind, are figures of a different order, the heroes. They are the children of that blurred boundary, often born from the union of a god and a mortal, inheriting divine strength but bound by human frailty, destined for deeds that become the measuring sticks of human aspiration and the mirrors of human suffering. Their stories are not mere adventures. They are the heartbeats of the mythic world, pulsing with labors of love, quests for redemption, and the haunting music of irrevocable loss. Consider first the greatest of them all, Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. His very conception was marked by divine intrigue. Zeus, disguised as her husband, lay with the mortal queen Alcmene. From this union, Heracles was born with a potential for greatness that stirred the wrath of Hera, the queen of gods. Her vengeance was not a single blow, but a slow poison woven into the fabric of his life. In a fit of madness sent by the goddess, the grown Heracles killed his own wife and children. When the fog of insanity lifted, he was left staring at the unbearable wreckage of his own hands. This is where his true story begins, not in triumph, but in the profound, ashen silence of guilt. To purify himself, he sought the oracle at Delphi, who instructed him to serve his cousin, King Eurystheus of Tiryns, for 12 years. The tasks Eurystheus set, the famous 12 labors, were designed to be impossible hopes for the hero's death. But they became Heracles' path of atonement. Each labor was a confrontation with chaos, a restoration of order through almost unimaginable effort. He strangled the Nemean lion, its skin impervious to weapons. He slew the 9-headed Hydra of Lerna, cauterizing each neck so 2 more would not grow. He captured the golden hind of Artemis and the Erymanthian boar, cleansed the Augean stables in a single day by diverting 2 rivers, drove away the Stymphalian birds, captured the Cretan bull and the maras of Diomedes, obtained the girdle of the Amazon queen Hippolyta, stole the cattle of the monster Geryon, fetched the golden apples of the Hesperides from the edge of the world, and finally descended into the underworld itself to bring back the 3-headed guard dog, Cerberus. These were not just feats of strength. They were exercises in endurance, cleverness, and patience. They were the slow, painful stitching of a soul back together, each completed labor a knot in the thread of his redemption. His story tells us that even the greatest strength is born from vulnerability, and that heroism can be the long, hard road one walks to face the monster within. In a different, softer register beats the story of Orpheus. His gift was not strength, but music, the son of the muse Calliope and a Thracian king. His lyre playing could charm stones to weep, trees to uproot themselves and follow, and wild beasts to lie down in peace. His love for the nymph Eurydice was the perfect harmony of his life. But on their wedding day, fleeing from an unwanted admirer, Eurydice stepped on a venomous serpent in the grass and died. Her soul slipped down to the silent halls of Hades. Orpheus's grief was a sound the world had never heard, a music so piercingly sorrowful that neither god nor mortal could bear it. Refusing to accept the finality of death, he did what no living mortal had dared. He descended to the underworld to retrieve her. His weapon was his art. At the banks of the Styx, he played for Charon, and the grim ferryman, moved, took him across. He played before Cerberus, and the great hound lay down, all 3 heads quiet. He stood in the throne room of Hades and Persephone, and his lament was so true that it softened the hearts of the implacable rulers of the dead. The very shades ceased their wandering to listen. Sisyphus paused on his hill. The Furies' cheeks were wet with tears of black iron. Hades, in an act of unprecedented mercy, agreed to release Eurydice on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead, leading her back to the world of light, and he must not look back until they had both reached the upper air. What follows is perhaps the most human moment in all of mythology. The The journey upward is long, steep, and utterly dark. Orpheus hears only the faint scuff of a footstep behind him. Is it her? Is it an echo? Is it the mocking whisper of the underworld? Doubt, that serpent of the mind, begins to coil around his faith. Just as the first faint gray light of the surface world begins to filter down, just as he feels the change in the air, the terror of loss overwhelms him. He must see. He turns. And there she is, his Eurydice, beloved and real, but still within the shadow of the cave. Their eyes meet for one fleeting, heartbreaking instant. A soft farewell escapes her lips, perhaps not even a sound but the shape of one, and she is drawn back into the depths, this time forever. Orpheus's failure is not one of courage, but of trust. Trust in the word of a god, trust in his own senses, trust in the promise of a future he could not yet see. His story is the anthem of love confrontation with the absolute, of the human need for proof against the requirement of faith. It tells us that some losses are final, that the look backward, though driven by love itself, can be the very thing that seals our separation. He would wander the world afterwards, his music forever tinged with sorrow, until he was torn apart by Maenads. But even in death, his severed head, floating down the river Hebron, was said to still whisper her name. In this tale, heroism is not in victory, but in the depth of the love that dared to challenge the universe's coldest law, and in the eternal echo of the beauty that remained after the loss. One hero labors to atone for an action, the other to reclaim a loss. One uses muscle and will against tangible monsters, the other uses art and love against the intangible boundary of death. Together, Heracles and Orpheus define the poles of the heroic heart, the arduous journey outward into the world's chaos to redeem the self, and the perilous journey inward into the realm of grief to reclaim the other. Their stories, one of hard-won purification, the other of beautiful, irreversible loss, are the deep, resonant chords in the symphony of what it means to be mortal, to strive, to love, and to remember. Not all heroes walked the path of overwhelming strength or world-weary lament. Some found their destiny in a different kind of virtue, a blend of quiet cunning, patient resolve, and a willingness to trust in the tools of intellect and guidance. Their quests were puzzles to be solved as much as monsters to be slain, and their stories unfold like intricate patterns, revealing that the thread of fate often favors not just the strong hand, but the clear mind and the prepared heart. Let us follow three such heroes, each on a journey that required a different kind of map. First, there is Perseus, whose very birth was a precarious secret, hidden from a grandfather who feared a prophecy. His quest, imposed by a tyrant, seemed impossible: to fetch the head of Medusa, the Gorgon. She was once a beautiful maiden, but transformed by Athena's wrath into a creature so terrible that a direct glance at her face would turn the beholder to stone. Her hair was a nest of hissing serpents, and she dwelt with her two immortal Gorgon sisters at the edge of night, in a land of twilight and stone. An outright assault was suicide, but Perseus was not alone. The gods, perhaps seeing the justice of his cause, offered tools instead of muscles. From the nymphs, guided by Hermes and Athena, he received a set of divine loans: winged sandals to fly, the helm of Hades to become invisible, a magical sword or sickle of adamant, and a brightly polished bronze shield. His most crucial strategy was born of reflection, literally. He would not look at Medusa directly, but at her mirror image in the shield's gleaming surface. So he flew to the Gorgon's lair, a place littered with the stone statues of failed heroes. Moving with invisible, careful grace, he watched the reflection in his shield, located the sleeping monster, and with a single guided backward stroke, severed her head. From her neck sprang the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor. Perseus placed the still potent head in a special bag and flew away, using it later as a weapon of petrification against his enemies before giving it to Athena to adorn her shield. His story is one of indirect approach, of using the mind to navigate a problem that cannot be faced head-on. Next, we travel to the island of Crete and the court of King Minos. Here, the story of Theseus, the national hero of Athens, intertwines with one of mythology's most potent symbols, the labyrinth. As penance for the death of his son, Athens was forced to send 7 youths and 7 maidens every 9 years to Crete, where they would be fed to the Minotaur, a monstrous hybrid, half-man, half-bull, born from the unnatural passion of Minos's wife for a bull sent by Poseidon. The creature was kept in the heart of the labyrinth, a vast, maze-like prison constructed by the genius Daedalus, from which no one could find the exit. Theseus, son of the Athenian king, volunteered to be one of the sacrificial victims, vowing to end the gruesome tribute. Upon arrival in Crete, he caught the eye of Minos's daughter, Ariadne. Seeing his courage and perhaps dreaming of escape herself, she offered him the key to the puzzle, a simple ball of thread. As Theseus was led into the winding, confounding passages of the labyrinth, he unwound the thread behind him, marking his path in the dark. He journeyed deep into the earthy, silent heart of the maze, where the only sound was the heavy breath of the beast. There, he confronted and slew the Minotaur, a creature more pitiable than evil, born of a god's trick and a queen's shame. Then, following the lifeline of thread back through the shadows, he retraced his steps to the world of light. His triumph was not just over a monster, but over confusion and hopelessness. The thread of Ariadne was the physical embodiment of memory and connection, the simple, brilliant solution that made the impossible journey reversible. It reminds us that sometimes the way out of our deepest confusions is to remember and mark the path we took in. Our final journey in this trio is the longest, a maritime quest across the known world. It is the story of Jason and the Argonauts, who sailed on the ship Argo to the distant, mysterious land of Colchis, at the edge of the Black Sea, to retrieve the legendary Golden Fleece. This was not a punitive labor, but a collective adventure to reclaim a kingship. The fleece itself, the skin of a magical, flying ram, hung in a sacred grove, guarded by a dragon that never slept. Jason assembled a crew of the greatest heroes of his age, Heracles, Orpheus, the winged sons of the North Wind, and many others. Their voyage was a catalogue of wondrous encounters, with the Harpies, with the clashing Symplegades rocks, with the bird archers of the island of Ares. When they finally reached Colchis, King Aetes set Jason impossible tasks: to yoke a pair of fire-breathing bulls with bronze hooves, plow a field with them, and sow the field with dragons' teeth, which would spring up as armed warriors. Here, Jason's success relied not on his own strength, but on the help of another, Medea, the king's daughter who was a powerful sorceress, smitten by love, or perhaps, as later poets would darkly suggest, by the manipulative designs of the gods. Medea gave Jason a magical ointment to protect him from the bull's fire and advised him to throw a stone into the midst of the sown warriors, causing them to turn on each other. Finally, to lull the guardian dragon, she used her spells and herbs. Jason obtained the fleece and, with Medea, fled back to Greece. His story is the archetype of the epic quest, a tale less about individual prowess and more about collective endeavor, divine intervention, and the crucial, often complicated, aid of a guide who knows the secrets of the foreign land. The golden fleece gleams not just as a prize, but as a symbol of distant, almost unreachable glory, attainable only through a combination of bravery, fellowship, and accepting help from unexpected, powerful sources. Perseus with his mirror shield, Theseus with his thread, Jason with his sorceress guide. Their stories form a trilogy of intellectual heroism. They teach that the monster, the maze, and the distant prize are not overcome by blunt force alone, but by reflection, by retaining a connection to one's origin, and by heeding the wisdom of those who possess different kinds of knowledge. Their legends softly suggest that the greatest adventures are navigated with tools of the mind and the heart, leaving a trail of light, a cord of memory, or a pact of trust to guide the way home. The stories of individual heroes, with their personal quests and private sorrows, eventually wove themselves into a grander, more terrible tapestry. A tapestry of nations, of pride, and of a war that would echo through the ages as the ultimate story of human conflict and its costs. This is the story of the Trojan War, a decade-long siege that began not with a clash of arms, but with a piece of fruit tossed into a divine gathering, and the long, winding journey home that followed for one weary soldier. It started at a wedding, the marriage of the mortal hero Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis. All the gods were invited, except Eris, the goddess of strife. In her spite, she threw a golden apple into the festivities, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." 3 goddesses immediately laid claim: Hera, the queen of power and sovereignty; Athena, the embodiment of wisdom and strategic might; and Aphrodite, the very essence of love and desire. They asked Zeus to judge, but he wisely declined, directing them to a mortal shepherd on the slopes of Mount Ida. Paris, a prince of Troy, living in exile. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera promised imperial power. Athena offered victory in war and unmatched skill. But Aphrodite whispered of the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris, a young man governed by the heart, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. His prize was Helen, but in claiming her, he stole her from her husband, King Menelaus, and in doing so, set in motion the gears of fate. Helen's face, they said, launched 1,000 ships. A pan-Hellenic alliance led by Menelaus's brother, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, sailed across the Aegean to the walled city of Troy to reclaim her. What followed was not a swift campaign, but a grinding 10-year stalemate on the windy plains of Ilium. The Iliad of Homer does not tell the whole war, but focuses on a few weeks in the final year, revealing the conflict's true nature, not as a glorious adventure, but as a wearisome, bloody tragedy that erodes the souls of even the greatest men. Here, the focus shifts from gods and monsters to the intimate human moments within the epic frame. We see Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, semi-divine and almost invincible. Yet his story is one of fragile, mortal pride. When Agamemnon dishonors him by taking his war prize, the captive Briseis, Achilles withdraws from battle in a rage. His anger is not just petulance. It is the wounding of a code of honor, the time that defines his very identity. His subsequent grief and rage upon the death of his beloved companion Patroclus is one of the most devastating moments in literature. A raw, uncontainable sound of loss that momentarily stills the battle. When he finally returns to fight, it is not for glory or Greece, but for vengeance, a personal, all-consuming fire that leads him to desecrate the body of the Trojan hero Hector. In Achilles, we see the terrifying, beautiful, and ultimately self-destructive power of a single, unbending emotion. And we see Hector, the Prince of Troy, the steadfast defender. He is the family man, the responsible son, the beloved leader. In a poignant scene before his final battle, he visits his wife Andromache and their infant son Astyanax in the city. The baby is frightened by the gleaming horsehair crest on his father's helmet, and Hector laughs, takes the helmet off, and dandles his child, speaking words of a future he will never see. His is a heroism of duty, of love for home and hearth, a counterpoint to Achilles' alienated, divine fury. His death at Achilles' hands is not just a military loss, but the symbolic death of the city's heart, a prelude to the fall of everything he fought to protect. The war's end came not through force of arms, but through the cunning that Athena, goddess of wisdom, favored. The wily Odysseus conceived a plan. The Greeks built a colossal, hollow wooden horse, left it on the beach as a supposed offering to Athena, and pretended to sail away. The Trojans, believing the war over and the horse a trophy, dragged it inside their impregnable walls. That night, the hidden Greek warriors emerged, opened the gates, and the waiting army poured in. Troy was sacked in fire and blood. The Trojan horse has become the eternal symbol of the deceptive gift, the danger that lies within an apparent victory, the vulnerability that comes when we lower our guard and bring the enemy, disguised as a prize, into our most sacred spaces. With Troy in ashes, the Greek heroes scattered to their fates. But for Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the journey home would become an epic unto itself, the Odyssey. This is not a war story, but a voyage story, and more profoundly, a story of the soul's journey. His 10-year struggle to return to his wife Penelope and son Telemachus is a map of psychological and spiritual trials. Each island he encounters is less a geographic location and more a state of mind, a temptation or a test. The Lotus Eaters offer the temptation of forgetfulness, a blissful apathy where the pain of memory and the struggle of the journey are erased. The enchantress Circe turns his men into swine, representing the animalistic loss of self, the surrender to base desires, until he, with the god Hermes' help, masters her magic and restores his crew. Passing the sirens, whose beautiful song lures sailors to their doom, he orders his men to plug their ears with wax and has himself tied to the mast so he can hear the song without succumbing. A powerful metaphor for experiencing destructive passions safely by binding oneself to the sturdy mast of reason and forethought. The twin dangers of Scylla and Charybdis, the six-headed monster and the devouring whirlpool, force a choice between two terrible losses, a lesson that some paths offer no safe passage, only the hope of surviving with minimal damage. Through all this, Odysseus is sustained by a single burning image, Ithaca. It is more than an island. It is the symbol of home, identity, and completion. His entire journey is a navigation back to his true self, which he had risked losing in the violence of war and the seductions of the wondrous world. His final triumph is not in battle, but in patience, disguise, and recognition, as he returns to a home overrun by suitors and proves himself not by announcing his glory, but by stringing his great bow and, with calm precision, reclaiming what is his. The Trojan War tells us about the catastrophic costs of collective pride and desire. The Odyssey tells us about the arduous, inner work required to find our way back from those catastrophes, to become whole again, and to be truly known in the place we call home. Beyond the epic struggles of gods and heroes lies a landscape populated by beings of a different order, creatures born not from the lineage of Titans or Olympians, but from the raw, dreaming imagination of the world itself. These are the mythical beasts and hybrids, the talking animals and silent monsters. They are seldom mere obstacles. They are manifestations of primal fears, moral lessons, natural forces, or the blurred lines between different states of being. To encounter them in a story is to confront a piece of the world's hidden language, a symbol made flesh, feather, and scale. Consider Medusa, perhaps the most iconic of these figures. We met her earlier as Perseus's quarry, but her origin story adds poignant layers. She was once a beautiful maiden, a priestess of Athena, whose most striking feature was her magnificent hair. But after being violated by Poseidon in Athena's own temple, the enraged goddess transformed her, turning that lovely hair into a nest of vipers and her gaze into a petrifying curse. Medusa became a monster, exiled to a land at the edge of the world. Her story is a tragic reflection on victim blaming, divine wrath, and the horrific transformation of beauty into terror. But her gaze also symbolizes a fear so profound it literally freezes us, paralysis in the face of the unspeakable. Yet, from her death sprang Pegasus, the winged horse of poetry and inspiration, suggesting that even from the most petrifying horror, something beautiful and transcendent can be born. Then there is the Sphinx who haunted the road to Thebes, with the body of a lion, the wings of a bird, and the head of a woman. She was a creature of composite wisdom and ruthless enforcement. She posed a riddle to all travelers. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Those who failed to answer were devoured. The answer, provided by Oedipus, was man, who crawls as a baby, walks upright in adulthood, and uses a cane in old age. The Sphinx, upon hearing the correct answer, threw herself from her rock to her death. She represents the existential riddle of our own identity and mortality. To pass her is to possess self-knowledge, however painful that knowledge may later prove to be. She is the guardian of thresholds, demanding that we understand ourselves before we can proceed. The Chimera was a fire-breathing hybrid of terrifying parts. The head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. More than just a monster, it was the embodiment of an impossible, unnatural combination. A being that shouldn't exist. It represented chaos, drought, and storms, a perversion of the natural order. Its defeat by the hero Bellerophon, riding Pegasus, signified the triumph of harmonious order over dissonant chaos. The Chimera lives on in our language to describe any fanciful, incongruous idea, a reminder of our deep-seated need to categorize and make sense of the world. In contrast to these terrifying composites are the noble hybrids, The centaurs, with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a horse, inhabited the wild frontiers between civilization and nature. Most were known for their uncouth, lustful, and violent behavior, symbolizing untamed instinct and barbarism. But there were exceptions, most notably Chiron. Unlike other centaurs, Chiron was wise, kind, and skilled in medicine, music, and prophecy. He was the tutor of heroes like Achilles, Asclepius, and Jason. Chiron represents the ideal fusion of animal strength and human intellect, of instinct tempered by wisdom. His noble suffering, a wound from a poisoned arrow that could not heal, yet from which he, an immortal, could not die, led him to willingly trade his immortality for the release of Prometheus, a final act of compassionate sacrifice. In Chiron, the hybrid form becomes not a monstrosity, but an elevation. Similar in their blending are the satyrs and their leader, Pan. These spirits of the wild woodlands had the ears, tail, and legs of a goat, and the torso and head of a man. They were creatures of unbridled lust, music, and revelry, followers of Dionysus. Pan, with his syrinx, panpipes, was the god of shepherds, of the sudden irrational fear in lonely places, panic, and of rustic music. They represent the untamed, joyous, and sometimes frightening aspect of nature that exists just beyond the cultivated field. A reminder that not all that is half animal is monstrous. Some of it is simply free, musical, and wild. Among the noble beasts, Pegasus stands apart. Born from the blood of Medusa, he is the divine, winged horse, a symbol of poetic inspiration, the soul's ability to soar above earthly concerns. To tame Pegasus was to harness the power of the muses. And the griffin, with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, was the guardian of precious treasure and a symbol of divine power, combining the king of the beasts with the king of the birds. It represented vigilance, strength, and the majesty of a power that watches over both earth and sky. These creatures, from the petrifying Medusa to the musical Pan, form a symbolic bestiary that populated the ancient Greek mental landscape. They were the externalized forms of internal realities: fear, curiosity, chaos, wisdom, instinct, and inspiration. They taught that the world was not just populated by beings like us or above us, but by embodiments of the forces we feel within. To dream of a chimera, to feel a moment of panic, to solve a riddle of the self, to seek a flight of inspiration. In these everyday experiences, we still walk the same mythic landscape, encountering the ancient creatures of a world that understood its truths not only through logic, but through the profound symbolic language of the imagination. From the symbolic creatures that roamed the edges of maps and dreams, we turn now to the physical spaces where the divine touched the earthly, where the stories of the gods met the daily rhythms of human life. For the ancient Greeks, mythology was not a detached set of tales. It was the living breath of their religion, a sacred narrative that explained the world and prescribed how to navigate it with reverence. This relationship between story and worship found its most profound expressions in places set apart: the oracular sanctuaries, the radiant temples, and the communal festivals where myth became ritual and ritual reinforced the mythic order. Perhaps the most potent of these sacred sites was the Oracle of Delphi. Nestled on the steep slopes of Mount Parnassus, overlooking a breathtaking valley of olive trees, Delphi was considered the omphalos, the navel of the world. According to myth, Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and they met here. This was the domain of Apollo, the god of light and prophecy, though an older chthonic power, associated with Gaia and the serpent Python, lingered beneath. At the heart of the sanctuary stood the temple of Apollo, and within it, the Adyton, a secluded inner chamber. Here, the Pythia, a priestess chosen from among the local women, would sit upon a tripod over a fissure in the earth, from which intoxicating vapors were said to rise. After ritual purification with water from the sacred Castalian spring, she would enter a trance state, and her utterances, often incoherent groans, cries, or fragmented phrases, would be interpreted by the attending priests and rendered into the enigmatic hexameter verses for which Delphi was famous. Kings and commoners alike made the arduous pilgrimage to Delphi, seeking guidance on matters of state, colonization, war, and personal conduct. The oracle's pronouncements were famously ambiguous. When King Croesus of Lydia asked if he should wage war on Persia, the oracle replied that if he did, he would destroy a great empire. He did his own. This ambiguity was not deceit, but a reflection of the complex, conditional nature of fate. The oracle's most enduring legacy, however, might be the two maxims inscribed in the forecourt of the temple: Know thyself, know thyself, and Medin Agon, nothing in excess. These were not prophecies, but philosophical cornerstones that emerged from the mystical environment, advising self-awareness and moderation as the keys to navigating a world governed by unpredictable divine will. Delphi was where humanity formally posed its questions to the cosmos and accepted that the answers would require their own wisdom to unravel. While oracles provided guidance, temples provided a home. A Greek temple was not a place for congregational worship. It was the house, naos, of the god. Its primary function was to shelter the cult statue, a magnificent chryselephantine, gold and ivory, or marble image that was believed to attract and focus the deity's presence. The most sublime example is the Parthenon, which crowns the Acropolis in Athens. Dedicated to Athena Parthenos, the Virgin, it was not merely an architectural marvel, but a profound theological statement in stone. Its design followed sacred geometry. Its sculptural friezes depicted the Panathenaic procession and the mythological triumph of order over chaos. The gods versus the giants, Athenians versus Amazons and centaurs. Every element, from the gentle curvature of the columns to the play of light on the marble, was intended to honor the city's patron goddess and secure her continued favor. To walk through its colonnade was to walk in the measured, harmonious presence of divine wisdom and civic pride, a daily reminder that the polis existed under the gaze of the Olympians. Religion was also enacted joyously and communally through festivals. These were periods of suspended normalcy, where the mythic past erupted into the present. The city Dionysia in Athens was a week-long festival in honor of Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and transformation. At its heart were dramatic competitions, where playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides presented tragedies and comedies drawn from the well of myth. The entire city would gather in the open-air theater. When the mask of an actor portraying Agamemnon or Medea appeared, it was not merely a performance. It was a ritual reenactment, a communal catharsis that explored the deepest human dilemmas under the auspices of the god. Through drama, myth became a living, shared experience of pity, fear, and ultimately release. On a Panhellenic scale, the Olympic Games, held every 4 years at Olympia in honor of Zeus, were a sacred truce. Warfare ceased as athletes from across the Greek world competed in foot races, wrestling, boxing, and chariot racing. The victors won only a simple wreath of olive leaves, but their glory was eternal. The games were a religious act, a display of human excellence, arete, offered to the king of the gods. The athletes competed nude, their bodies a testament to human potential sculpted in the divine image, and their victories were seen as signs of divine favor. The Olympics wove together piety, politics, and physical culture, reinforcing a shared Hellenic identity rooted in common myth and reverence. In the quiet of a temple, the cryptic words of an oracle, the collective gasp of a theater, and the straining muscles of an athlete, we see the full integration of myth into life. The gods were not distant. Their stories explained the world's origin. Their oracles guided its navigation. Their temples anchored its spaces, and their festivals rhythmically renewed its communal spirit. This was a religion of doing, of participating in a cosmic story through ritual action. It was a way of being in the world that saw the hand of Athena in a well-crafted law, the wrath of Poseidon in a sudden storm, the laughter of Dionysus in the grape harvest, and the approving nod of Zeus in a perfectly thrown javelin. The myth was the script, and the religious life was its daily, devout performance. The sacred rhythms of oracle, temple, and festival eventually faded. The last sacrifices to Zeus were made over 16 centuries ago, and the stone of the Parthenon bears its scars from time and war. Yet, the stories themselves did not die. They did not become mere relics in a museum of forgotten beliefs. Instead, they performed their own kind of metamorphosis, slipping out of the realm of active religion and into the very bloodstream of Western culture. They became a shared language, a deep well of symbols, and an endless source of inspiration. The legacy of Greek mythology is not a monument we visit, but a living architecture in which we still think, feel, and create. This transition began even in antiquity, with the Romans, who adopted and adapted the Greek pantheon, syncretizing gods and repurposing stories to fit their own civic ideals. But the true endurance test came with the rise of Christianity, which explicitly rejected the old gods as demons or fables. One might have expected the myths to vanish. Instead, they were preserved by scholars, reimagined by poets, and gradually stripped of their religious authority to be appreciated for their literary, philosophical, and artistic power. In the Middle Ages, they became allegories, the story of Orpheus symbolizing Christ's descent into hell, Hercules representing virtue overcoming vice. They survived by being useful, by being malleable enough to carry new meanings. The Renaissance threw open the doors to this rediscovered treasure. With a hunger for classical knowledge, artists and writers plunged back into the source material. Botticelli painted the birth of Venus from the sea foam. Michelangelo sculpted a recumbent Dionysus. Shakespeare wove allusions to Troy, Hercules, and Pygmalion into his plays. The myths provided a potent vocabulary for exploring humanist themes, the complexity of passion, the tension between fate and free will, the nature of heroism and suffering, all under the graceful guise of nymphs, gods, and heroes. They became the ultimate prestige source material, a sign of education and refined taste. This artistic engagement has never ceased. In literature, the 20th and 21st centuries have seen a powerful resurgence. often from perspectives the ancients never considered. James Joyce's Ulysses uses the Odyssey as an elaborate framework for a single day in modern Dublin, finding epic grandeur in the mundane. Poets like H.D. Hilda Doolittle and Derek Walcott have drawn on the myths to explore themes of identity, colonialism, and personal trauma. Novelists have given voice to the silenced women of the tales. Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad retells the Odyssey from the perspective of Penelope and her hanged maids. Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles and Circe explore the emotional and psychological depths of characters previously defined by their roles. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, for all its youthful adventure, fundamentally understands the timeless premise. The gods are still here, their dramas now playing out in modern teenagers. These works are not simple retellings. They are conversations, challenging the old narratives, asking new questions, and proving the myths are elastic enough to contain our contemporary anxieties and hopes. Beyond the arts, the myths forged the very concepts with which we understand the human mind. Sigmund Freud looked to the stories and found in them universal patterns of the psyche. The Oedipus complex, a child's unconscious sexual desire for the parent of the opposite sex and rivalry with the parent of the same sex, takes its name from the tragic king who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. The Electra complex is its feminine counterpart. Carl Jung, Freud's one-time disciple, went further, proposing that myths express universal, inherited subconscious patterns he called archetypes. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the wise old man. In this view, we don't just read the story of Theseus. We recognize the archetype of the young man entering the labyrinth of the unknown to confront the monster of his own inner chaos. Mythology, for psychology, became the royal road not to the gods, but to the collective unconscious. Our daily language is also seeded with these ancient stories. An Achilles' heel is a fatal weakness, however small. A Herculean task is one of extraordinary difficulty. A Trojan horse is a deceptive gift hiding a destructive secret. To have a Midas touch is to turn everything to success, or, in the original myth's darker lesson, to gold you cannot eat. We speak of a narcissistic person, echoing the youth who fell in love with his own reflection. We describe a fraught choice as being between Scylla and Charybdis. These are not dead metaphors. They are crisp, evocative shorthand that carries a whole narrative in a phrase. Even our map of the heavens is a legacy. The Romans gave the planets the names of their gods, which were the Greek gods by another name: Mercury, Hermes, Venus, Aphrodite, Mars, Ares, Jupiter, Zeus, Saturn, Cronus. Our telescopes have continued the tradition, naming moons after mythic figures. Jupiter's moons are Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto. Saturn's moon is Titan. We gaze into the cosmos and see, reflected back, the old pantheon. And in the vibrant, sprawling realm of popular culture, the myths are perpetually rebooted. Blockbuster films like Clash of the Titans, in all its iterations, and the Percy Jackson movies bring the stories to mass audiences. Video games like God of War and Hades immerse players directly in the mythic world, allowing them to interact with its characters and systems. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, while drawing on Norse mythology for Thor, fundamentally understands the superhero as a modern demigod, complete with family drama on a cosmic scale. These adaptations may take liberties, but they prove the core narratives of power, responsibility, love, loss, and identity remain compelling engines for story. The true legacy of Greek mythology, then, is its incredible adaptability. It survived the end of its own religion by becoming something more porous and powerful, a cultural toolkit. It provides us with archetypes to understand ourselves, metaphors to describe our world, and narratives through which to explore the perennial questions of what it means to be human. The gods may no longer dwell on Olympus, but they have taken up residence in our novels, our therapy sessions, our idioms, and our dreams, forever whispering the old, beautiful, complicated truths about who we are. As we near the end of our quiet exploration, a final question gently presents itself. Why do these stories, born from the soil and sea of a vanished world, still hold such power over us? The answer may lie not in their literal truth, but in their profound symbolic truth. Over the last century especially, we have stopped looking at myths merely as entertaining fables or historical curiosities. Instead, we have begun to use them as lenses, as sophisticated tools to decode the human psyche, to understand social structures, and to question the very narratives we've inherited. The modern gaze upon mythology is one of analysis and reinterpretation, a soft, persistent light shone into the ancient shadows to see what new shapes emerge. One of the most profound analytical approaches came from the realm of psychology, pioneered by Sigmund Freud. Freud saw in myths the dramatization of universal, unconscious conflicts. His most famous borrowing is the Oedipus complex, named for the tragic king who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. For Freud, this story was not a one-off tragedy, but a blueprint for a fundamental psychosexual stage in male development, representing a boy's subconscious rivalry with his father for his mother's affection. Similarly, he later proposed the Electra complex for girls. While many of Freud's specific theories are contested today, his fundamental insight was revolutionary. Myths are not about gods out there, but about the drives and fears in here within us. They are collective dreams, giving form to our deepest, often unspeakable, anxieties about desire, identity, and mortality. Carl Jung, Freud's colleague and later dissenter, expanded this view into a grander, more spiritual framework. For Jung, myths were the primary expressions of the collective unconscious, a reservoir of psychic inheritance shared by all humanity, containing universal patterns or models known as archetypes. These archetypes are not inherited ideas, but inherited potentials for forming ideas. The stories of mythology are where these archetypes put on local costume. The hero, Theseus, Hercules, is the archetype of the ego's journey toward consciousness and independence. The Great Mother, Gaia, Demeter, represents nurturing, fertility, and also the devouring aspect of nature. The trickster, Hermes, Prometheus, embodies disruption, creativity, and the breaking of rules. The shadow, monsters, Hades, represents the repressed, dark aspects of the self. In this view, we are not just reading about Perseus slaying Medusa. We are witnessing the archetypal ego confronting and integrating the terrifying, petrifying aspects of the unconscious, the shadow. Jungian analysis suggests we are all living out these mythic patterns, and the stories provide a map for the soul's journey toward wholeness or individuation. Stepping back from the individual psyche, anthropology and sociology offer another lens. Here, myths are seen as social charters, reflecting and reinforcing the values, structures, and anxieties of the society that created them. The hierarchical, often chaotic family of Olympians, with its patriarch Zeus constantly asserting authority and managing rebellions, can be read as a divine mirror of ancient Greek patriarchal social structures and political tensions. The elaborate rituals of hospitality, xenia, overseen by Zeus Xenios, explain and sanctify a crucial social code for a world of travelers and potential enemies. The story of Pandora, the first woman from whom all evils entered the world, can be understood as a mythic expression of deep-seated misogyny and male anxiety about female agency, serving to justify a social order where women were controlled. From this perspective, myths are not timeless truths, but cultural artifacts that tell us less about cosmic origins and more about the specific humans who told them, their fears of chaos, their need for order, and their justifications for power. This brings us naturally to one of the most vital modern re-engagements with myth, the feminist critique and reclamation. For centuries, the female figures in these stories were largely interpreted through the patriarchal lens that shaped them. Pandora as the cause of evil, Medusa as a monstrous seductress, Helen as the passive object of desire who starts a war. Modern scholars and writers have powerfully turned this gaze around. They ask, whose voice is missing? What does the story look like from the riverbank, from the loom, from the silent throne in the underworld? This reinterpretation has been both analytical and creative. Scholars re-examine the figure of Hera, not merely as a jealous shrew, but as the goddess of sanctioned marriage, perpetually wounded by a system that allows her divine husband endless infidelity. Her rage a justified, if destructive, response to her powerlessness. Medusa is reclaimed from monster to victim, a symbol of the horrific punishment meted out to women who suffer male violence, and later, a potent emblem of feminine rage and protective power. Persephone's story is read not just as an explanation of seasons, but as a narrative of a young woman's traumatic abduction, her development of agency as queen of the underworld, and the powerful, world-altering grief of her mother, Demeter. Writers like Margaret Atwood, Madeline Miller, and Natalie Haynes have given these reinterpretations wings, crafting novels and poems that center the women's experiences. In Miller's Circe, the nymph slash, which is no longer a mere episode in Odysseus's journey, but a complex protagonist grappling with power, loneliness, and self-definition over centuries. These works do not reject the old myths. They engage in a vital dialogue with them, filling the silences and challenging the inherited perspectives. They ensure the myths remain a living, evolving conversation, capable of addressing contemporary issues of agency, trauma, and voice. So, what do we see through these modern lenses? We see that the myths are multidimensional. They are psychological dramas playing out our inner conflicts, sociological blueprints of ancient societies, and patriarchal texts ripe for critical revision. Their enduring power lies precisely in this richness, this ability to sustain multiple, even conflicting, readings. They are not closed books, but open fields. We can walk across them with Freud's map of the unconscious, Jung's archetypal compass, an anthropologist's notebook, or a feminist's torch. Each path reveals different contours, different treasures. And in this ongoing process of analysis and reinterpretation, we do not diminish the myths. We participate in their endless life, finding in their ancient forms the timeless, shifting reflections of our own ever-evolving human story. We have wandered a long path together, From the formless whisper of chaos to the shining courts of Olympus, through the silent fields of the dead and across the wine-dark sea, we have stood beside heroes in their labors and their losses, solved riddles with them, and sailed with them to the edge of the world. We have seen how these stories were once the living breath of a civilization, and how they transformed into the enduring architecture of our art, our language, and our understanding of ourselves. Now, as our quiet exploration draws to a close, we might softly ask, what, in the end, are these myths, and why, after all this time, do they still feel so intimately familiar, as if they were not stories about them, but faint, remembered echoes of us? Greek mythology is not, and never was, a simple collection of fanciful tales about capricious gods and strong men. To view them as such is to miss their profound, haunting depth. They are, instead, the earliest and most eloquent attempt to answer the questions that stir in the human heart in the silent hours. Before philosophy had its language and science had its method, humanity had story. And these stories were the vessels for our first, raw encounters with the universe's immense mystery. Why does the sun cross the sky? Why does winter steal the green from the world? Why do we feel love that aches, rage that consumes, pride that elevates and then destroys? The myths provided answers, not in cold formulae, but in warm, sprawling, contradictory dramas where the forces of nature and the passions of the heart were given faces, names, and motives. But their genius lies in their refusal to offer easy comfort or moral simplicity. The gods are not perfect moral exemplars. They are magnified reflections of ourselves, with all our flaws, our passions, our generosity, and our pettiness scaled to a cosmic level. Zeus upholds justice but is serially unfaithful. Hera protects marriage but nurtures a vengeful wrath. Athena champions wisdom but shows a chilling lack of mercy. The heroes are not invincible paragons. They are vulnerable, often broken, men and women whose greatness is inextricably tied to their suffering. Heracles' strength born of guilt, Achilles' glory shadowed by rage and grief, Odysseus' wisdom forged through longing and loss. In their imperfections, we recognize our own. Their struggles are not alien. They are ours, written in the grand, metaphorical language of monsters, labyrinths, and long voyages home. This is why they are a mirror, not a museum exhibit. When we peer into this ancient mirror, we do not see a foreign world. We see the timeless contours of the human condition. We see our own hubris in Icarus flying too close to the sun, our own desperate hope in Pandora's sealed jar, our own grappling with duty and desire in Hector's farewell to his family. We see the labyrinth of our own minds, the minotaurs of our private fears, and the Ariadne's thread of love or friendship that can guide us out. We understand the siren call of temptations that promise bliss but lead to ruin, and the necessity of tying ourselves to the mast of our principles to safely hear their song. The myths give form to the formless pressures within us, giving names to our anxieties and narratives to our inner conflicts. They also speak to our place in the larger order. They remind us of a world alive with presence, where a mountain is not just rock but a potential abode of nymphs, where a sudden storm is not just a weather pattern but the mood of a god, where a grove of trees holds not just ecology but a sacred spirit. In an age where the world can feel disenchanted, parsed into data and stripped of mystery, these stories re-enchant it. They invite us, if only for a moment, to see the universe not as a machine, but as a story still being told. A story in which we, like the heroes of old, play a part, however small. They reconnect us to a sense of wonder, to the feeling that the natural world is not a backdrop, but a character, profound and participant. Ultimately, the enduring power of Greek mythology rests on this simple, profound truth. It is about being human. It charts the full, glorious, and terrifying spectrum of that experience, from the primal fear of chaos to the civilized order of the polis, from the ecstatic worship of Dionysus to the cool reason of Athena, from the crushing weight of fate to the fragile, defiant spark of free will. It does not provide answers so much as it companionably shares the questions. It assures us that our loves, our griefs, our pride, our foolishness, and our yearning for meaning are not new. They are as old as the stories we have told since we first gathered around a fire, looking up at the starry cloak of Nyx, wondering who placed them there, and what our own flickering light means in the vast, beautiful dark. So let these stories settle over you not as distant legends, but as familiar whispers. They are the echoes in the canyon of time, reminding us that to be human is to be part of a great, ongoing story. A story of seeking, suffering, loving, and sometimes with great effort and a little luck, finding our way. The gods may be silent now, the oracles may be still, but the myths remain. They remain because we remain forever children of that same curious, hopeful, flawed, and wondrous spirit that first looked at the world and dared to imagine a story for it all. And in that shared imagination, across the millennia, we find a quiet, deep, and abiding connection. And so the tale is told. The last image fades, like the final ripple from a stone cast into a still, dark pool. Let the figures of gods and heroes soften now in your mind's eye, their vivid colors blending into the gentle monochrome of memory. Release the details, the name of the nymph, the number of labors, the twist in the labyrinth's path. Let them all drift away, like leaves carried on a slow, autumnal stream. Feel the weight of the epic settling, not as a burden, but as a soft, heavy quilt of stories laid over you. There is no more need to follow a narrative thread. There is only the quiet, expansive space that comes after the last word is spoken. The chamber of imagination, so vividly populated moments ago, now echoes with a peaceful, hollow resonance, ready to be filled with the unstructured images of approaching sleep. Breathe in slowly, and with the breath, let go of the distant past. Breathe out, and with it, release any lingering tension in your shoulders, your hands, your jaw. The wars are over. The voyages are complete. The monsters are vanquished or understood. All is at rest in the mythic world, and so too can it be in yours. Turn your attention inward to the gentle, rhythmic tide of your own breathing, in and out. Each breath a quiet wave on a shore of consciousness that grows softer, smoother with every cycle. The stories were outside of you, but the feelings they evoked, the awe, the compassion, the wonder, those are within you. Let them be your companions now, not as sharp thoughts, but as soft, emotional hues that tint the edges of your awareness. The world outside your window, the room around you, is your own peaceful reality. It is your Ithaca, your quiet Elysium at the end of the day's journey. Here, there is no quest to fulfill, only the simple, profound act of being, of resting, of allowing the mind, so beautifully engaged, to now beautifully disengage, to unravel the thread of thought and let it fall loose and effortless, into the welcoming dark. Listen to the silence that rests beneath the faint sounds of the night. It is a deep, kind silence, the same that cradles the stars and cradles the sleeping earth. It is the silence from which the first stories emerged, and it is the silence to which they all return. Let yourself be cradled by it now. There is nothing more to know, nothing more to ponder. Only this moment, this breath, this gentle, irresistible descent into a quiet as ancient and nourishing as the myths themselves. Let your eyelids grow heavy, not with fatigue, but with the pleasant weight of a journey completed. Surrender to the soft pull of rest, where stories dissolve into dreams and dreams into the deep, healing, and silent well of sleep.